Hello everybody, my name is Ayanda Mdluli. Welcome to Business Report TV. Today we're going to be addressing some issues that have been happening around the PIC commission that is currently taking place in Pretoria. To my left, I have my colleagues, Sizwe Dlamini, who's the live editor of Business Report, and I have Noni Mokati, who's the content editor for Politics and Development. Welcome to the show. And yeah, first things first, Noni, if you could maybe just highlight for us, what are the key things that stood out for you this week?
So it's in the business sector, it's been a very busy week. I'm sure you can appreciate, if you look at the trends that have taken place this week, you would remember that Peter Moyo was sort of axed as the Old Mutual CEO after he was accused basically of pocketing about 30 million rand from in dividends from NMT Capital. So that was one of the biggest stories, and then if you also sort of throw back as well, one of the biggest stories that also sent people talking and, having debate around it was your Naspers, allegedly trying to take out money of the country and sort of investing elsewhere. So I think people this week were generally, apprehensive about a lot of things. I think another story that we sort of can't forget as well is the issue of the PIC as well. It only resumed this week, and they only had about 2 days of testimonies before they sort of wrapped up, and people wanting to see what's happening around that.
Before they did an adjournment for what they call is logistical reasons. So I don't know, Sizwe, would you like to perhaps just jump in on the third point? We're going to come back to the first two stories, but I think this particular issue there with the PIC adjourning, and then obviously there was a major story that that we had worked on during the week where Matsepo More, the former CEO of the PIC, had written a letter to the PIC board and executives where she says that she was instructed by Advocate Yanni Laba, who's the evidence leader in the PIC, to focus on just 9 companies.
That bit is actually quite interesting because it sort of explains why these guys actually focused on such a small group of companies. Because I mean, if by nature, if you are going to do this kind of investigation, you're going to cast your net wide until you find something that you are going to be able to work with. But this time around, it's really focused. And the interesting thing about it is that these guys are focusing on companies that, in total, have cost 22 billion of the PIC's investment. Just 22 billion. The PIC is an asset manager of more than 2 trillion worth of assets, and they're focusing only on 22 billion. Meanwhile, there's several other companies that have been reported widely in the media that have actually cost the PIC more than 100 billion. I don't know what
yeah,
you think
if I may just jump in there, when you're saying they're focusing on a certain extent, I think, in terms of providing context for our audience and people, reading or following up on the PIC, if you have companies in South Africa, is very important because you have a lot of investments, etc., and the PIC is an investment, platform. But when you systematically have certain companies being chosen out or being sussed out and being focused on, it creates a problem because then, people don't know exactly what's happening. So who do we look into? I think we need to get to a point where we say, let everyone account at the end of the day, regardless of, who they are.
I think what's particularly interesting here is that, the biggest corporate scandal to ever happen on the face of South Africa, Steinhoff, where 25 billion rands of pensioners' money poofed and disappeared, just like that, and the current key focus at the commission right now is on the BEE deal, where 9.4 billion was given to Lancaster, and Lancaster gave Steinhoff, I think, 5 billion rand out of that transaction. But my point is this: if we have this major corporate scandal that took place, where 25 billion rands of pensioners' money has gone down the drain, why then come back and only focus on that BEE transaction?
The interesting thing is that, again,
Instead of having Marcus Juster
Marcus
at the
Mister
commission to
The
explain.
Yeah, the interesting thing there is also because, you know, when Advocate Lubber actually gave us that response, remember the response that he sent out? Yeah. That response, he actually tries to clarify that, no, look, yes, we focused on these companies that were on the initial list, which he calls an initial list. So which pretty much, okay, that also explains that that sort of legitimizes the fact that there is a letter that was sent out. But anyway, that's really a matter of opinion. But at the end of the day, he comes to say that, you know what, we did try and deal with Steinhoff by asking someone questions in relation to Ascendis and Steinhoff, but not them directly. Interestingly enough, they brought in Lebashe. They asked them direct questions. Scary. You know, that bit is that. But I mean, again, it's just my take on it. I'm not saying this as a matter of fact,
Yeah, I
but
mean,
it is just a take on it.
If we had to look at the initial statement that we are alluding to right now, if you break it down, you know, the statement says that about 72 witnesses were interviewed, meaning that these are including, so it does not say that 72 companies or 72, they were brought forward and they appeared before the commission, 72 witnesses. So, you know, there are some of the discrepancies that you do find in that statement. So it was a bit troublesome, you know, when you sort of read through it.
Yeah. So then, which brings us to another point. Then, if the commission is not looking at Steinhoff in its entirety, and it's not looking at Tonga Hewlett, which, by the way, went belly up just last week. It's not looking at EOH, whose share price has plummeted by what, 88%. You know, so. Is there a certain degree of protectionism that comes into play when it comes to certain companies? And dare I say, some might argue that if you look at Advocate Lubber's list, the companies that he requested for information from the former CEO of the PIC, some might even argue that there's a target here painted on the backs of black-owned companies.
You know, if I had to, perhaps putting it as protectionism is not the right word. Yes, there seems to be, you know, if I may put it, you know, they're trying to vilify black businesses. And you know, when I'm jumping into this, I'm thinking about an interview I had with the AfriRent CEO. He's a black-owned business company. He tried accessing the market. It's not easy. I think his gist of my interview with him was that it's not easy as a black business to do business in a place where it's been predominantly, you know, owned by the white monopoly capitals. Obviously, black businesses, you know, they don't have the access that they would like to have, and I feel like this is the conversation that we should be going at. We should continue with saying that how do you open up the industry for black businesses to access the equal opportunities as their counterparts? Yeah,
there's also you brought up an interesting thing there. You brought up the matter of EOH. That was quite you know, a headline maker, especially because we're still waiting for the release of the ENS
Africa reports. Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And you know, like, you know, as it has been reported, you know, word has it that it's got some quite interesting, damning allegations that come out of that.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, from what I've gathered is that the ENS Africa report, you know, investigated damning allegations of corruption in various government departments, such as water and sanitation, the South African Police Service, eThekwini Municipality, and the Department of Defense as well. So,
and again, hold on, sorry to cut you off there, but you know, the interesting thing here is that this is an investee company of the PIC.
Yeah, and the PIC's got 9 points?
About 9%, yeah.
9.2%.
Somewhere there, yeah.
Yeah, of a stake in EOH. And where is EOH at the PIC Commission?
Well, yeah, or at least, you know, some questions being asked or something, but we're not seeing it. But then again, I mean, maybe Advocate Lubber knows what he's looking for.
And I suppose
but
time
again,
will tell.
it leaves us guys out there, you know, watching this and saying,
But let's go back to the ENS Africa report. let's say, speculation is rife about the findings. The general consensus is that the findings are very damning. But until we actually sit and peruse through the actual document instead of relying on what insiders are telling us, I think, what does it mean for EOH if they have found to have generated profits out of illicit means? Does that mean they will have to restate their financial results if the authorities decide to recoup the funds that were made through corruption, essentially?
Yeah.
Where does EOH stand in all of that?
That one leaves us with a lot of ifs, So it's really hard to speculate. But at the end of the day, look, if these guys are found to have actually made profits using illicit means, they would actually have to give out their financial statements and results and things like that, because then we would have to need a clean audit from the guys to see that, oh, okay, this is that, and this is that. But then again, I'm not sure if they'll be able to repay the money, because that is usually quite a difficult thing for people to do.
So then now, if the core generation of profit in the company was through corruption, and their bottom line and basically all of the finances are generated through corruption, what does that say about the future viability of the business?
Let's look at Bosasa.
What does that say about the future of the business? I mean, is it sustainable to run a company based on corruption?
Absolutely not.
In the South African context, it may appear so, if you look at Bosasa.
Yeah,
if you look
absolutely
at
not. I mean,
many other companies that do business with government, essentially. But can we maybe have a viewpoint?
Now, I was saying, you're asking a very plain and simple question. Can South African companies be able to, basically sustain themselves, run themselves based on corruption? I don't think it is, because, if it does, if that happens, then we've seen the results. They end up at the Zondo Commission. We've seen how the Zondo Commission then affects whatever's happening in terms of the running of government, your state, and your SOEs, etc. So I really think it's, like I said earlier, it's time to sort of relook the entire system. I think we also ask questions that we know already exist. I think it's time, to sort of dig deeper.
So which brings us to another point then. If it's unsustainable, then surely EOH is done for. I mean, if it's unsustainable, what are they still doing on the JSE? What is the next move for the Johannesburg Stock Exchange? If it's unsustainable to run a company based on proceeds of corruption, what are the investors saying about that?
In fact,
so
before we actually,
are we at the beginning of the end for EOH?
But I wouldn't want to go too far ahead on the EOH thing, because the report is not really out yet. It's still sitting with the board, so we're not privy to the contents of the well, at least I'm not privy to the contents of the report. But the one thing that becomes of interest to me here is that, okay, here we have the PIC that's an investor in pretty much all these companies and things like that. And as far as I remember, they're still trying to put an interim board in place. Okay, now that's the curious thing, and I think at this point, we're sitting here, all our eyes are wide open. There are a lot of things that we can actually speculate about, but it would be really key for us to actually just, keep an eye out for that report, because when that report comes out, it's going to give the PIC board a whole lot of stuff to think about. In fact, is there a PIC board?
Actually, funny enough, you mentioned that Kosatu gave a testimony and a presentation to the PIC Commission. So he went before Judge Lex Mpati, Jill Marcus, and Emmanuel Lediga, and he said that there needs to be more worker/union representation in the PIC board, because the current structure, is insufficient. It's not working. And as we've seen, there was a mass resignation earlier this year of the whole entire board, which was orchestrated by Mondli Gungubele and Sibusisiwe Zulu.
In fact, what I heard was that Sizwe Zulu actually drafted the
Yeah, she actually
entire-
drafted the letter and came up with the genius plan for the whole entire board to resign, effectively putting the institution in dangerous limbo. So I mean, Kosatu's there, a new board is yet to be appointed. How does the PIC, I mean, obviously it's such a major headache for David Masondo, who's the new Deputy Finance Minister, and by virtue of being the Deputy Finance Minister, is going to be the chair of the PIC. So how does he deal with this headache? How does Tito Mboweni deal with this headache that Mondli Gungubele has created?
I think first things first, if we had to look at Matthew Park's testimony at the PIC, one of the things that he was very unapologetic about is pointing out to some of the inefficiencies of the PIC. So for instance, he said that, the employer basically stipulates who becomes a representative on the PIC board, which is problematic. And then he went on to say that they have been calling for 50-50 representation, as you alluded to earlier on. And that same, calling of a 50-50 representation was also contained in the amendment bill, the PIC amendment bill, which they took about 3 years trying to get, into Parliament and trying to have it passed. And if you look at that bill, it's very, very comprehensive. I mean, one of the things that stood out for me, and I think Jill Marcus also alluded to it, was the fact that when you look at the PIC Act, it only has 4 pages. It works on 4 pages. When you have like an investment,
Which makes it,
one of the hugest investment companies,
a 2 trillion rand asset manager
in itself,
with 4 pages. Come on.
Yeah, that in itself is a problem. Do you want to sort of jump in?
Yeah, because, okay, wait, I see that you're identifying a problem here, but okay, let's look at it nicely. These guys manage more than 2 trillion worth of assets with a 4-page bill. Don't you think in this case less is better? I mean, I would.
No, absolutely not, because then you don't have some of the stuff that is important that's added. You don't have it's not comprehensive.
You need to be comprehensive. You need to have the nitty-gritties, because I mean, if everything is just vague, then you leave it open to interpretation on your own terms, which then becomes a problem.
But something
and
is
then
working.
which will ultimately lead to a situation where
something is
you have
working
another
well there.
commission.
These guys grew. Just about 4 or 5 years ago, they were at around 600 billion. Now they're at 2 trillion. Because something is working there. But I agree. Maybe we need to then tweak the books so that you can maybe spur further growth.
I think from a corporate governance perspective, it's very, very important that you go into detail and and that you provide a comprehensive bill and various amendments and all of that. So I tend to agree with Noni on this one, that you need to flesh things out. You need to see what is what and which direction you're going to go. Otherwise, you'll end up with another commission of inquiry.
And what's also interesting, if I may just come in there, he took a jab at Treasury, saying, and when we leave the nitty-gritties of the PIC Act and we're coming into, executive committee, he was saying that the Treasury needs to get its house in order, because effectively you do have Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, and you alluded to David Masondo, and there have been there have been problems where someone was saying that, and it's interesting, I'm not sure if people caught light of it, but Jill Marcus was saying that there needs to be a review. When you have, being the chairman of the PIC is a full-time job. It's a job that needs to be taken seriously. So when your duties then are split between you being a chairman and being the finance minister, deputy minister, deputy minister, where do you get time to actually fix stuff? So do we take away the powers of the deputy minister being the chairman and basically hire someone else, or do we look around how to fix it? Because that's where the problem is.
Go ahead.
I think the union's other issue here is not just, the actual running of the PIC. I think the real issue here is them actually just keeping an eye on their investments, because it is ultimately the workers' investments that's happening here. And their real problem here is that this is pretty much a vote of no confidence in, dare I say, according to James Noku, the chairman, the independent director, the non-executive director, and the former acting CEO. You know, that, according to James Noko's email, is that is where the problem is within the PIC. Hopefully, you know, the commission is going to uncover that. You know, we really hope they actually do uncover that. But that is what the problem is, according to James Noko's email. Yeah. Now, the unions want to, more than anything, not necessarily get into the running of the thing, but they really want to make sure that the people who are there are not going to take their money and give it to their living lovers. Yeah.
But I mean, I think it's a legitimate concern. You are working with workers' money. You know, he pointed out, Matthew Parks, that 98% of the PIC money is workers' money, and you can't forget that. So I think with them, you know, wanting to be in the thick and thin of things, is the fact that they're saying we are trying to protect the interest of workers. Mm.
And, you know, just to wrap things up, when it comes to the issue of the board of the PIC, I mean, obviously you've mentioned James Noko, and you know, and how he's implicated basically, you know, the whole entire board of the PIC. I mean, you've got a situation where Sizwe Zulu is managing 2 billion. Is it 2 billion rands worth of funding for investments?
Which is authorized to sign off.
Which is authorized to sign
off.
It's
not just her; it's all directors.
Yeah, and then she gets into a romantic relationship with someone who's been benefiting from the PIC. You know, who's been scoring major deals here in the PIC. And then, obviously, you know, you've got your Mondli Kongubele, who's also another character on his own, who's also been implicated, who's said to have been captured by Sizwe Zulu. I mean, looking at what, you know, James Noko has been doing and how the PIC board has been implicated with the new chair, David Masondo, does he have his work cut out for him? Is he the right man for the job?
Okay, before we go into that, may I just point out that actually it's not cast in stone that David Masondo is going to be the new chair, because what's happening here is that the Treasury is actually in the process of appointing an interim board, which has now had 3 nominees from 3 different unions. So in the interim board, they may nominate an interim chairman who may not necessarily be the deputy finance minister. But, you know, looking at the status quo, at this point, he would have to be the best person, because they'd have to find some reason to nominate somebody else as a chairperson. But, you know, either way, the new chairperson that's going to be there will have his work cut out for him. But at this point in time, also, it has to be clear to everybody that the interim board is not really going to do much about what the operations of the PIC, it's not going to do much about the operations within the PIC. At this point, the interim board is going to effectively wait for the findings of the PIC commission. When the PIC commission comes out with its findings, then the interim board will be able to then deal with, you know, based on the findings, they'll be able to know how to appoint a permanent board. And then they'll start dealing with what's happening within the PIC. And again, like you say, the new chairman will have his work, or maybe chair lady, we never know.
Yeah. But yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I mean, as we move on, you know, let's look at things from a broader perspective here. We've seen Mr. Jahana from South African Airways. We've seen Peter Moyo from Old Mutual. We've seen Mr. Khatebe from Eskom. We've seen a whole lot of black executives in our economic landscape, in major corporates biting the dust in recent times. And we've got organizations like the Black Business Council, the Black Management Forum, and the ANC Professionals League coming out and saying, no, we are in a crisis here. South Africa is not only in a CEO crisis, is not experiencing a CEO crisis, but it appears as though there is a systematic purging or a systematic attack on black executives in the country. And obviously, I mean, when you look at how, you know, the PIC's been, under the spotlight recently, and if you look at how ESCOM has also been under the spotlight, it's not looking very good. It's not looking very good. So what's your viewpoint on that? Is there a systematic purging or a systematic attack on black executives? And if you look at what's been happening at the commission, with the focus being mainly specifically on businesses.
Okay, I get where you're going with this. I get where you're going with this.
What's happening? Like,
however, slow down. I wouldn't really say it's a systematic attack on black executives. I'll talk about the executives at first. We'll probably talk about the black business people later. But at this point, I wouldn't really say it's an attack on black executives. I'm going to use this overused saying that, you know, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, right? So these chief executives jump into ESCOM, and then they find that, you know, the corruption and the mix-up and everything is almost a way of life within the system. This guy walks in there and he looks at this whole thing and he says, I will not survive with this kind of work. And then he leaves, you know. That's pretty much my take on the whole thing. So I wouldn't really say it's a systematic attack on them. I think they are leaving to sort of retain their integrity. You know what I mean?
I think we have to be frank with ourselves. There is a crisis. There is a problem. You can't have the exodus, like a mass exodus of black CEOs, if you want to put it that way. You know, let's not only focus on color here, but I mean, whether it's black, it's Indian, it's white. If CEOs are going to be leaving our state-owned enterprise, it's a problem. So I remember President Jacob Zuma had given an undertaking that issues will be sorted out. But I think going forward, we need the nitty-gritty. We don't just need him to say, we will sort out these issues and ensure that our SOEs run properly. We just need to find out how is it going to be sorted out. Because what you are saying is that they're appointed, this guy's given a chance. He's young, whether he's female, or whatever it is, they go in there and they find that it's a mess. So I think the problem, you know, the question rather to ask is not about black, you know, systematic attacks on it, but I suppose it's asking what is it that we are not doing to retain them? What is it that we're doing not to make their working environments conducive? I think that's the question that we need to ask ourselves at this stage.
You know, I honestly think that this then brings us to the point of, you know, what does it mean for economic transformation in South Africa's economic landscape? Because if you look at our parastatals, if you look at some of these major conglomerates, I mean, like Eskom, Transnet, even South African Airways, to be fair here, you know, the majority of companies that are getting contracts with these parastatals, right, is white-owned businesses. And when you come into the fray as a black CEO, it may seem, and then you try to effect transformation by bringing in black-owned players, that's the argument, is that you become a target in those entities. So when you look at it, you know, from that viewpoint, some may argue and say, look, I mean, it's very, very difficult for a black CEO if you're going to come on a transformation ticket to try and change the system and try and bring in more black-owned players so that, you know, we sort of level the playing field in the country. But as soon as you push that narrative and as soon as you try to do that, then it becomes problematic and, dare I say, you become vilified. And evidently the face of corruption becomes black, and then we have another black CEO that gets booted out the door. So that's my take on it. And yeah, you look like you've got something to add on that.
I do, actually.
Yeah.
I do. The narrative, and this is what, you know, I think is problematic, you know, in this current climate, in this current political climate, economic climate, is that so often, you know, we as South Africans are always, you know, criticized of talking, but no acting. We do not act. We're good at policies, but we don't have implementation skills. I think we've been talking about this issue of transformation for the longest time. And I think what we need to get to is engaging with your black professionals, young executives, etc., and finding out from them, because I feel like a lot of them are not speaking up on delving into some of the issues. I mean, if you speak to Moyo right now and ask him what happened, if you speak to Jahana, and ask him what happened, what made you go, we don't have an idea. I think transformation is something that we need to talk about. But the narrative that's been given at the moment is that when you're a black CEO or a black executive, it's part of a token. So you're seen as a token of transformation. I feel like that's an insult to all of them. They have something.
Not a champion.
No, I don't think so. I think you become a token and not a champion, and that unfortunately is the problem here, because that's the narrative that's been given. Like, let's put Ayanda, he's black, he's young, he's gifted, but we're not saying what is it that Ayanda is bringing to the table, and actually what change Ayanda is bringing to the table. I think we get caught up in the politics of it. So I really think we need to start changing our conversations around it, and basically having the voices of these people, because we can cry transformation, we can push transformation until the cows come home. But if we don't really get into nitty-gritty, that is the problem that we're going to have for the longest time.
Sure. And then, thank you for your viewpoints as we move along to, to our final topic for discussion. Writing as a journalist, as a financial journalist or investigative journalist, or a political journalist, in the South African economic landscape, where as soon as you start covering and digging and exposing what's happening, you get various slurs, where people will respond to you and say, actually, you are just here to push a certain narrative, you're here to push certain propaganda, and it appears as though in our country right now, there are people that you can write about and there are people that you can't write about without being vilified. A case in point is that Bell Pottinger comment regarding the story that was published on Advocate Laba. What is your thoughts on that? I mean, when are journalists allowed to actually do their job in peace? We're not saying that, whoever you write about, when you expose them, they must clap their hands. But when are journalists allowed to actually just tell their story, provide the evidence, and let the readers decide for themselves without being labeled and have all of these aspersions being casted on them?
Yeah, you see, we've discussed quite a lot. I mean, the issue of when journalists are allowed to do certain things has been actually covered quite extensively. But I'd really like to focus on Advocate Laba. Okay, his reaction, it was not necessarily Advocate Laba's reaction, because the response was actually, signed off as the PIC commission. So that's the first thing that leaves us in a situation. To make that Bell Pottinger reference, I think that was completely unnecessary, because at the end of the day, we cover this thing, we look at everything, we get a letter that says this is what's happening, we put it out there to say we have a letter that says this is what's happening, and then we get called a name. That for me was a little bit, was completely unnecessary. However, again, under the context of freedom of speech, he's free to say what he wants to say. But at the end of the day, that really was completely unnecessary. But then that's the situation we find ourselves in. If it continues, obviously we'll then probably have to make, raise it with probably the relevant structures and things like that. But at this point in time, it was pretty much just a reaction from the PIC for us guys uncovering stuff that they never thought we probably would have uncovered.
I think as part of my parting shot, you've hit it on the head. You've hit the nail on the head. I think it shouldn't be that journalists are expected to write about certain people and not write about certain people. I think we all know our jobs, and we know what our duties are and our responsibilities are. But I feel like, yes, South Africa needs to, or whoever is, whether it's the Zondo Commission or whether it's the PIC Commission of Inquiry or whether it's if there's going to be another inquiry that's set up, I think people should learn that journalists are there to report, and they're there to report factually. And if you do have issues that you're not happy with, there are platforms to raise it on. But just to go and put certain phrases in a statement alluding, I mean, to the fact that, you know, it's bell-potting and journalists have it's very troublesome.
Yeah, sure. So this has been a very, very productive week, you know, both economically, politically, and business-wise, where we've also seen the president of the country giving the State of the Nation address, and he's told us to dream big. And yeah, and there you have it. Obviously, these are very, very big conversations that we're having, and we'd actually love the rest of the country to contribute and to be with us and be at the forefront of all these economic issues. So until next time, my name is Ayanda Mdluli on Business Report TV, signing out.